Hey everybody, I am here today to talk to you about winding yarn for a project. I found some absolutely beautiful yarn, at Loops of course, uh, to make the sweater. It's called Beatnik. I found it as a download on nitty.com and I got my yarn, but it's not ready to work with. This yarn is in a hank and you cannot knit with it in a hank. I need to turn it into a ball so that I can work with it. And I'm going to show you how to turn the yarn into a ball with a machine and by hand. But that got me thinking about how yarn comes from the store. So I want to talk to you about the different ways that yarn is going to come to you from either a store or a website. So yarn comes basically three different ways. It can come as a ball. Here's an example. Here's another example. This one's kind of fancy because it's got some ribbon on it. This one just has a little paper tag. And this one here, this is called a cake, which is a ball that's just flat on the top and the bottom, and it just sits there and it won't roll away. They call that a cake. But the thing about the ball is it's ready to go. Once you get it home, you just take off the little tag. If I can, and it usually just pops out. And then you find the end and you're ready to start knitting or crocheting. Same thing with the cake. You can just pull the yarn out of the center, or you can wrap it from the outside, whatever your preference is, and you're just good to go to start working your project. These are skeins. The thing that all skeins have in common is they're usually oblong shaped and they are round. And like the ball, you can pull the yarn out of the center or you can pull it around from the outside. If you get your yarn from like a department store or a craft store or a hobby store, most likely most of the yarn is going to be in a skein. Not all of it, but most of it. The other thing that you have to be careful about with this skein is if you're pulling from the inside, eventually when there's just a little bit of yarn left, it is going to kind of collapse in on itself and it could get tangled. And if that happens, you're probably going to want to pause and take that last little bit of yarn and wrap it into a ball so it doesn't keep tangling up on you. So I want to talk to you about winding yarn into a ball. Like I said, you can do it manually just with your hand and the yarn, or you can do it with machines. And these are the machines that you need to be able to do it. You need a Swift, which is what this little wooden part is here. It kind of looks like the inside of an umbrella. Kind of goes up and down. And then you need a yarn winder. Yarn winders come in all different kinds of shapes and sizes. This is a wooden one. This is my very first one. It's a plastic one. It still works. I still use it a lot. Whatever kind you want to use and whatever kind you like, if it works for you, it's the right one for you. So let me show you first how to use the machines, and then I'll show you how to do it by hand. As I said, you're going to get a hank that's twisted like this. First thing you have to do is undo it. Just pull the ends out, and then we're going to get it back into that big circular shape that I was talking about. And once you get it opened up like this, I find it helps to kind of stretch the yarn out. It's been twisted that way, could be months, weeks. If you got a big stash, it could have been twisted that way for years. So we kind of want to get that yarn out and get it relaxed so that it's easier to wind. Once you have that done, we're going to put it on the Swift. And I find the easiest way to do that is just to loop it around. And I hold it out here. And then we push the Swift up. Sometimes you kind of have to nudge it a little bit. And then you take this part down here at the bottom and we're going to push it up. And then we're going to twist the little screw and that locks it in place. And now the yarn is going to be able to spin around and be wound into a ball or a cake. You need to take the tag off. This one you could cut it, but it also is just looped in there. So I'm going to take the tag off. Now we have these pieces that I mentioned before where they were tied in different places to kind of keep the yarn from untangling. We need to take those off. And so I always find it very helpful, and I'm saying this is the voice of experience, is make sure you pull the little tie out. Make sure you find the piece that actually has the end of the yarn on it. You don't want to cut here and accidentally cut a loop or part of the yarn, because if you do that, then your yarn is just, it's going to be in two pieces. It won't be one continuous piece of yarn. So I like to pull it out here and then cut it. Then what you're going to do, pull it out, throw it away. Here's another one. I'm going to do the same thing. Pull it out. I've got the ends there. We're going to cut it and remove it. I think there's another one over here. And so we're looking for that end piece. Got the ends, got it safely away from the ring of yarn. We're going to pull it out. And there's one more. Now this is where the yarn was actually, there's a tie here, and then there's also the ends and the beginning of the yarn. So so when you see that, there'll be 4 pieces there. So you want to pull it out. I always like to cut it right above the knot. And then one should pull out like the other ones did. And now we have the beginning piece of yarn, which I'm going to tuck in, and the end piece here, and we're going to wind it. There's this little threader thing. It's kind of similar to what you'd see if you had a sewing machine. You're going to weave the yarn through there. And then there's this little slit here at the top of the winder. That's to catch the thread to, yarn. Just talking about sewing machines there, got mixed up. You put the yarn in there, and then that's going to hold it in place. Now, depending on your yarn and how slippery or thick or thin it is, you might need to hold it for just a minute to get it started. Let's turn it here. And then you're just going to keep turning your yarn until you get it all off here and on here. So I tend to you don't want to wind it too fast, because you'll end up putting a lot of tension on your yarn and you'll be stretching your yarn, and there's really no need to do that. Just a nice, even, easy tension, and then you're just going to keep winding until it's all done. So we are almost done. We've got almost all the yarn in our cake here. And I'll show you just kind of how to finish it off here. So you're going to keep going till it's all done. Now this is just a personal preference of mine. You don't have to do this. We do this at the store so people will know what yarn is what color, what dye lot, etc. But it's also just real handy if you're doing it at home. So I'm taking this tag and I'm going to stick it right in the center. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the yarn off, and I'm going to leave the tag in the center, and I kind of squish it together so it doesn't come out. And that way, if I'm knitting with this and I don't remember what color it is, or I need to know what yarn it was, I don't remember, I need to go back to the store, I have the tag with the ball of yarn. And that way you don't have to worry about losing it and not remembering what it was. So that's how you wind it using a machine. So the other way to do it is to wind it by hand. Now, I'm going to show you on this. And you can still use your Swift if you don't have a person or something else to hold your yarn on. You want to put it on here, just like we did before, but we're not going to use the yarn winder. We're just going to wind it into a ball. So again, we're going to pull away from the ring of yarn. Now this is the end of the beginning pieces here. Oops, got that one out. Get this one out. There's probably one more. I can't tell you, before I learned to pull this out, every once in a while I would cut my yarn in the middle and it would hurt my heart. Okay. As you can see, this one is a little wonky here. Now see this where it's getting a little hard to pull? What I'm gonna do is take this off and stretch it, not stretch, but kind of pull it out and loosen it. Because sometimes yarn is kind of grabby, and that'll help here. Let's tuck this. And sometimes they just get wound and they're hard to. There we go. Sometimes you have to fiddle with them. But we talked about making your ball so that it has a center pull or the outside, and to get it started in the center, you want to leave a little tail because this is what you're going to pull on. This is going to be a really small ball here because this is light fingering weight yarn. But what we're going to do is I just hold it in my hand, and you want to make a figure 8. So I'm just going back and forth a few times. And 5, 6, about 8 times, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you could do it for 10 or 20, but it's really not necessary. So I pinch it in the center. And now what I'm gonna do is this is my tail, so I just loop it in between my fingers. But then you're just gonna start winding. And you're just winding a ball. I know you've all wound yarn, string, rope, all kinds of things into a ball. And you just do that for a while until you want to change directions. Once you have this part here, so I find it easier. I just take the 2 little ends of that and fold it over. It'll still work. And I just keep winding. And when you need to pull, you can just pull some off the Swift and keep winding. And if you want to change directions, you can do that. You just want to make sure that you always keep this little piece out because that's going to be where your center pull is. So I'm going to keep winding, and then when I get to the end, I'm going to show you how the center pull works. So as you're winding, if you find that the ball is getting bigger and it's about to kind of eat your tail, you can just, because it's a center pull, you can pull the tail out a little bit and then keep winding. And then that way you don't have to worry about covering up your tail. Okay, so we're getting to the end. Now about winding this ball, it doesn't matter. There's no rhyme or reason or rule except wind it into a ball. I know some people with stripy yarn, woo, slippery there, will change directions every time the color changes. That's not necessary. You can wind it any way you want. I just wind until it feels like I'm wound long enough in that direction, and then I go a different direction. Now, personal preference again, I tend to not, if you wind really hard, you'll be putting a lot of tension on the yarn and you'll kind of stretch it, and I don't like that, so I don't do that. So kind of be easy. So if you're using a Swift, if I were to just keep pulling on it without pulling it off the Swift first, it would get real tight. So I tend to pull it off here when I'm winding by hand. So just so I can kind of have a little bit more control over my tension. When you're using the yarn winder, because it kind of goes back and forth, it doesn't have that same problem that I find that people have when they wind it by hand. Oh, and we're getting to the fun part because we're almost done. Okay, there we go. Now, there we go. Okay, so what I want to show you is I can pull this yarn from the outside, or I have that center pull that will pull from the inside as well. So I just wanted to show you, you can do it either way, whichever way you like and that works best for you. I do want to tell you that if you're using a yarn that's kind of slippery, like bamboo or silk or some of the novelty yarns, they will collapse in on themselves and get tangled. So you just want to be real careful when you're working with those. I tend to work from the outside and go in with that, because if you're doing that center pull, when you're pulling from the center, you're going to create a hole here, and that hole is going to grow from the inside out. And when that yarn falls in on itself, especially those slippery yarns, are going to tangle. So I would really encourage you with these slippery yarns to work from the outside and go in. So that is all I know about winding yarn in using a Swift or by hand. Can I tell you an anecdote about yarn Swifts?
Sure.
So when I used to go into yarn stores with your dad, he would always wait in the car. And then one time he came in and he saw the ladies behind the counter winding yarn using a Swift and a yarn winder. And he goes, "They make tools for that?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "We're getting them." So that's when I got my yarn Swift and yarn winder, because he was really tired of having to just sit there and hold it with it wrapped around his hands. Whoops.